I just counted. This will be the eighth episode that I've recorded, which is going to be covering my 2002 2003. That's just crazy. And I know I've got more to go. My name is Phil, and you're listening to The Lip. Yeah, eight episodes, 2002 to 2003. The last, counting this one, six episodes are focused on 2003 because 2003 is the really big year that had the really big incident, the sickness, which is what ultimately changed my thinking throughout my entire life up until this point. At 47, this happened when I was 25 years old. It's amazing what happens so far back in the past and how it affects the way a person becomes in the future. When you really pay attention to the things that are going on, you see the development of how the person changes. And it's more interesting when you actually are sitting back and the person in question is yourself because you really lived that story. And sometimes when people do things, experience stuff, they don't always necessarily take the time to reflect on what exactly happened during the event that was the story. Now, of course, at 25, and 24, of course, 2002, 24, 2003, 25, it's real easy to say that I was way too young to really fully appreciate exactly what was happening at the moment, even with threat of death itself. Still at that young, dumb age, as I called myself at that time, I just really didn't have a clue as far as a concept of what was going on. And of course, looking back at it now, which is what I'm doing through these last eight shows, like I've said, I'm really getting to appreciate that time. And it's fascinating to see the lessons that I've had to experience. And of course, this show today isn't going to be any different. I'm going to move forward and talk about my experience in Philadelphia after getting sick. Yes, Philadelphia. How so? I'm going to talk to you about the University of Penn and how that certainly changed the outlook of my sarcoidosis. And I can certainly say that without question was one of the biggest steps that I had to make throughout 2003 and even a little beyond. Not going to get into too much after 2003 because that's where the focal point is. But I will say that there was some events in 2004 that came up. Not as important, but they were definitely interconnected to a point. You'll understand when I get to it. But as for right now, it's time to fill in the blank. The question for the fill in the blank this week is going to be so simple. How did I feel about traveling to Philadelphia to go to a doctor? Well, I'm going to certainly say I was very very apprehensive. I wasn't sure that the doctor that I was going to go see at the University of Penn was going to be much different than Dr. Kaiser, who I had previously seen in New Jersey, an individual who I felt was simply looking to write a book. But that's my personal opinion. I don't know if that was his plan. Nor will I ever. It's been 20 something years, 23 years since, 22 years since the incident. And after I went to the University of Penn, I never made contact with Dr. Kaiser again. So, the fill in the blank question for this episode is, how did I feel about going to Philadelphia to go see a doctor about the sarcoidosis ultimately? And the only thing I can say is very apprehensive. That's the fill in the blank. Now it is time to ring the bell and start the main event. The main event of this show. My goodness. I went through, of course, I need to go through a slight recap because this story is so long. I need to just give you a little taste of what happened the week before, especially if you are new to the show and this is the first episode that you've chosen to listen to. The first thing I say is I would recommend stopping this episode where it is right now if this is the first episode that you've listened to of The Lip. And I would strongly recommend to go back to episode 205, which would have been titled My 2002 January to Half of May. Start there. Because if you start there and move your way down through these episodes all the way up to where we are right now, which would be episode 212, you would have been able to follow up with the story and you'll understand it a lot more. Now, for those of you who have been consistently listening to these last 8 episodes, I offer you this recap. Last week I spoke about the month of July 2003 for me. I spoke about the fact that yes, that Dr. Kaiser was at a point where I wasn't comfortable with seeing him, and my general practitioner, who I was completely trusting in, had recommended that I go to the University of Penn. However, during that University of Penn trip, but the actual acquiring of a doctor's appointment in July, where I was making it, I wasn't able to get an appointment until the end of September. My doctor wasn't happy about that, and he took some time while I was in his office to make a phone call to the University of Penn and try to get my appointment moved up as closely as he could. And he was able to finagle it so that he got the earliest possible appointment that I could have gotten my hands on. Now, granted, we're talking about the end of September is when I had originally got my appointment. Because of the high volume of unfortunate people who had lung ailments that needed to see the doctors at the University of Penn, the earliest appointment he could get me was going to be in, I think it was mid-August. It's better than late September. So I ran with it. I also told a story last week about when I was doing my workouts. I had started really doing a lot of crunches before breakfast. I would end up stretching myself to do a couple hundred crunches before lunch, before dinner, and before I went to bed. Now, the story I told was about lunch because on days that I felt strong, or at least as strong as I was going to feel, what I would do is after I did my several crunches before I ate lunch, I would then go and take a walk somewhere in the neighborhood of a mile to 2 mile walk, just something else to stretch out and get some more energy. Turns out this day that I spoke about, I ran into an old friend from the Wawa gang. And typically, well, this friend's name was Joe, or at least I'm going to say it was Joe. Normally, it would take me about an hour to do my walk, and then I would eat, and I would usually leave somewhere between 12 and 12:15. Usually, I'd be back, and it's going to be an hour. I'd come back sometime around 1 or 1:15 ish, give or take, depending on how far I walk. This day, I ran into Joe on my way back. Of course, I didn't have a watch on me. I was just walking. And this is an era where I had a phone, but it wasn't nothing like the ones we have right now. Turned out that I ended up talking to Joe for what must have been almost 3 hours. The two of us really just sat there and talked about all things life. It was crazy. Good conversation. Never forget. It was a lot of fun. Talked about the fact that there's people at the store who hadn't seen me in a while. They were missing me. And that when he got done, eventually when he went back to the store, he was going to tell everybody that we sat and had this conversation. Now, the thing that I always never really paid attention to, sort of a sidebar about this conversation, and I do digress, but I want to make this abundantly clear about this conversation. I spoke to Joe for roughly, like I said, it must have been like 3 hours before my mother and my stepfather came and walking after me because it had been so long and they knew that my normal routine would have had me back much, much sooner. After we finished our conversation, I told him he wanted to know if I wanted to ride home. And I told him, no, I want to finish my walk. So he drove on. Now, I was at the time living in Manchester and he was on his way to Jackson. And the curious thought that never dawned on me for this last 22 years about this 3 hour conversation I had with this friend of mine. He was heading somewhere. He had a destination. He didn't tell me where he was going, but he was going somewhere. And the fact that he spent about 3 hours talking to me, he must have been really late to wherever he was going, or because the kind of person that he was, I imagine he probably just simply told the people when he got there, he got there. But I've often wondered about that. And the thing that's really hilarious to me is even after I went back to work and I started talking to him again more steadily because he would come into the Wawa that I worked in and we would talk, I never asked him where he was going and if he was late to getting there. I never asked him. Was it a problem for him to talk to me all the time? But the kind of guy that Joe was, I can promise you that he prioritized that conversation so much that whatever else he was on his way to doing, which was his primary focus, became secondary. Maybe even farther out than that because of the importance of actually speaking to me that day. And I certainly can say that I appreciate that. And unfortunately, I never told him that about that conversation. Certainly something that I had wished that I had done back in 2003 when I got back. But I had up until 2006, 2005, before he moved to Florida, where I had a whole 2 years where I could have asked him. And then even until I left Wawa in 2007, he kept coming into the store. Every so often, he'd come back up to see his son, his grandkid, and I still never asked him. That'll always be one of my what ifs in life. Or why? Why didn't I ask him more so? It's more important than why, I guess. But that was left back in 2003 and never got to resurface. But as for now, we're going to go back to 2003. This time, we're going to go to mid August because now I'm on my way to the University of Penn for the very first time to see a doctor who I never met and was uncertain as to what this doctor was going to be able to do for me. Now, my general practitioner, who had been with me from the beginning of my first hospital stay, Dr. Booth, he had come to a point where his area of expertise and his ability to help me was becoming more and more limited. He needed me to see a specialist, and that specialist would have been one of the doctors at the University of Penn. Thus, here I am. Because of a very weird but necessary situation, I was. Uh, I didn't travel alone. I had my mother go with me because, well, my inability to maintain a level of energy for a certain period of time could have been problematic as I was driving down the road. And thus, I had a co pilot and pilot if necessary, if you know. Considering that the whole time that I was sick, I hadn't really driven farther away than my aunt and uncle's house to see my cousin and them in 2003. And that was only about a half an hour trip. Now, from my residence at the time, traveling to Philadelphia to the University of Penn was probably 3 times about an hour and a half, considering traffic on Route 70, crossing the bridge, and the single worst fact of the whole thing, there was limited access to GPS. Didn't just pull up my phone and said, "Hey, I want to go to the University of Penn. Google, show me where it is." Mm-mm, no, had to rely on MapQuest. Some of you who are listening to this may be so young, you have no idea about what MapQuest was. Others of you are old heads like me, and you know exactly what MapQuest was. I'll say it like this for those who don't know. There was a time where if you wanted to go somewhere and you didn't know where you were going, you needed to get a paper map that showed you the different roads that you were on, and you had to follow the paper map. Now, in 2003, by that point, we had progressed some, a little, not too much, but some, where the paper maps could be generated from the internet of sorts, and you could print those directions out. And unlike the regular paper map where you would have to create your own route, the MapQuest would have the route already created for you, and all you had to do is follow the instructions that the MapQuest told you to take. You just had to stay on that route, and you would get to where you were trying to go. There was no real time um, telling you exactly where you are. There was no real time speed limit on each road that you were on. There was no little gadgets telling you if there was a speed trap around. You just had to kind of glance at that map every so often and make sure you were on the right road. And boy, you needed to make sure when it said turn, you needed to know what street that you needed to turn on. If not, you would have got lost and you'd have been off your little map paper, and then it would have been a real mess. I can't even describe to you how bad that was. Well, I kind of can. If we fast forward to the future, several years when I went to go and on my first date with my wife, that MapQuest map, I got lost real bad. So all I can tell you is pay attention to that little piece of paper, or you're gonna be way, way lost. Now back to my quest to get to the University of Penn. I had a middle of the day appointment because I wanted to make sure that it was light when I was on my way down so that I could see all the potential roads that I needed to go down. Of course, really paying attention to it. And after years of traveling, I found much more efficient ways to get to the University of Penn if I wanted to from New Jersey. But I still had to make sure to go which would the way that was the most effective, which would have been taking me across. I believe it would have been the Walt Whitman Bridge. hmm Because it put me in just smack dab right in the middle of the area where the University of Penn was at. Now that was really interesting because typically at that time I was used to driving much faster speed limits for a longer period of time. Now, granted, in 2002, when I did my pizza vacation and I was driving all over the state of New Jersey, most of the speed limits that I was on were 50 miles an hour, 55 miles an hour. And of course, I was obeying those speed limits to perfection. There was no spots where I was driving 70, 75 miles an hour. No, that never happened. Not a chance. Of course, that's exactly right. But now, this is the first time here in 2003 that I've actually personally driven in Philadelphia. And I wasn't real sure about the protocol, but knowing that I had to go into Center City and wasn't really as sure of speed limits around, and I noticed that they were very slow because the traffic was a lot more congested than anywhere that I'd ever been at that time. I had to really sort of watch how I was going because, first of all, the grid system in Philadelphia at the time, to me, seemed like I was on an alien planet. I was really, really confused. Of course, there were no jug handles. You had to literally turn left if you were going to go left. I mean, how was a 25-year-old me who was used to turning right in order to turn left through a jug handle? How was I supposed to handle that? Well, I don't know. I just used the force, I guess, which is pretty much what I did in order to navigate the situation. I was really, really, really confused. And eventually, it took me, oh, a good 20 minutes before I realized that I had missed the University of Penn and had to come back around in order to get back to the area that I needed to get to in order to get to my doctor's appointment. Now, fortunately for me, like I said, my appointment was at noon. I had lots and lots and lots of time because I left at around 8:30, 9 o'clock. Wanted to make sure that I got there and didn't miss his appointment, especially since my doctor took um, such serious interest in making sure that I made it to that appointment when I made it to that appointment. When he made it, I couldn't possibly miss this or be late. That's just nothing that I wanted to have any part of. And of course, this is even before I learned the great thing that a friend of mine told me that worked at Pet Boys, and I heard that and I appreciated it. What he said was, late is on time. Other way around. I messed that all up, didn't I? Early is on time. On time is late, and late is unacceptable. And I heard that when I was in my early 30s, and it stuck with me since. And I just hate being on time because, well, if you're on time, you're late. Think about it. If you get to a place early, especially if it's a doctor's appointment, and you've never been to this doctor, doesn't matter. It could be a doctor 5 minutes away from your house. You still have to come in. You still have to show them your insurance. And if you have a copay, they're going to ask you to fill out some forms. So you probably need at least 10 minutes to get all that stuff together. And then you go in and you can see the doctor potentially. Now, with this appointment, it was a lot different than that. This one, this man, I literally had I had to go to this doctor's appointment, and before I saw my doctor, I had to get X-rays of my lungs. They wanted fresh X-rays to see what was going on. Then I believe they took blood that day too, because the doctor wanted to get fresh panels that they had on hand. Plus, they requested the information that I had from my other doctor who sent it. So they looked at my blood work that they just took, the x-rays that they just took, plus all the other tests that I had. Now, when I got there, like I said, I was doing all those tests first. It was at least a good hour of me taking those tests before I even saw my doctor. Let that sink in. Turns out I took all those tests. The doctor actually reviewed all those tests and hadn't even seen me yet. And it had already been like an hour. And then finally, I got the call while sitting out in the waiting room after the x ray and the blood work. And I come to see what was, for some reason, a surprise to me. Again, I was 25. Now, I made mention of Dr. Kaiser, who I was seeing, who was a pulmonologist, who was, in my opinion, looking to write a book based on my symptoms and trying to cure me of sarcoidosis. He was an older guy. If I had to guess at the time, at 25 years old, dude who appears to be in his 50s might as well be Moses. But I think he was in his 50s. Just a quick guess. So I expected my doctor to be a little older, especially considering that this was a specialist who was specifically recommended by my primary physician. So the first shock wasn't even the age of my doctor. Don't take this the wrong way, but it was the gender. I was shocked because at 25, I had never personally had a woman doctor. And it was very interesting when I met the doctor who is not Dr. Thomas, but I'm going to call her Dr. Thomas for purposes of protecting the innocent, as I like to say. That immediately threw me for a curve. I was a little stunned by it, a little taken back. Because, like I said, at 25 years old, every doctor I'd ever had was a guy. Every single one. I never had one female doctor before in my life. And I was a little thrown off. Just a little bit. Not that I didn't think that she didn't know what she was doing, because clearly she did. Because she wouldn't be a doctor about to check me a guy out who has a really rare disease if she didn't know what she was doing. It was just sort of like a boom, like, wow, this is the first time I ever had a female doctor. And I was sort of, like I said, I was just surprised by it. And then young female doctor. That's another thing. She was young. She was very, very young. Now, in comparison to myself, like I didn't actually check her birth certificate to see how old she actually was. But if I had to guess, she was no more than 5 years older. At the very maximum, I would say she may have been 32. So I'd call it 7. But if I had to guess, like I said, anywhere between anywhere between 29 and 32, I wouldn't be surprised. maybe even a little younger, because, of course, at the time, she was working at the school. So she was kind of a student, but not really. Like, she was past that point. It didn't seem as if she had any restrictions to her. She was pretty much able to do her evaluation, me and her. She just talked to me. She looked at everything. She did an examination, and she had a plan in mind, and she was ready to implement it almost instantaneously. However, the appointment that we had was probably a good hour and a half, because she was extremely thorough about the disease itself. She told me a lot of things that I didn't really know necessarily about the disease itself. And she was real clear about a couple of major factors with the disease. And one of the things that she was real clear about was there is literally no way to tell how you get it. Sarcoidosis just shows up. It just does. Sometimes people thought theories of it could have been something in the environment, it could be something genetic, but there's really no answer to how you get it. And she was trying to make sure that I kind of understood that. And then the other thing that she really imprinted on me was, as bad as I felt, and I had good days and bad days, and I was telling her about that, she was like, you could wake up a week from now with not a single symptom. And then a week after that, you could be worse than what you are right now. There's no rhyme or reason for how it affects you. You could be completely energy robbed, which was my major symptom. The cough could have come back, all kinds of things. But then she said, just as quickly as it showed up and as mysteriously as sarcoidosis came on, it could very easily just be gone, just like that. But the most important thing that's going to help sort of maintain that and allow me to adjust myself well is taking the steroid in order to make sure that I was able to do it. That steroid that I was on was the one that essentially maintained and sort of fought the sarcoidosis at the time. I can't believe that I was taking this steroid for as long as I was. And the worst part about it was, at the moment, I'm kind of laughing about it myself. I can't think of the name of it. I didn't write it down for the notes. Just know that it's a very nasty steroid that had a lot of horrible side effects. But fortunately for me, because of, it sounds weird to say it like this, my symptoms of the disease sort of counteracted the side effects of the steroid that I was on, which is, it's laughable to think about it, because my initial symptoms were the cough, were the ankle swelling with a little bit of a rash. That stuff that was held off by the steroids. But one of the major problems that I had from the steroid would have been weight gain. Now, it turns out that the counter to that weight gain from the steroid was a symptom of my disease, which was massive weight loss. So the two sort of played tug of war with each other, so that I never really gained any weight from the steroid because the symptom of weight loss was so effective that it fought off the weight gain from the steroid. It's actually really quite fascinating when I think about it. It really was. And she was kind of finding that interesting as well because prior to our meeting in that mid August day, I had been on the steroids because once they discovered that it was sarcoidosis, I was on the steroids from early May all the way up until I saw Dr. Thomas in August. So it had already been May, June, July, August. It had already been 2.5 months, 3 months that I was on these steroids. And I had no side effects from the weight gain. It was just pure maintenance. It was weird because there was a point when I was losing weight like every week. And then the steroid stopped it. But because of, like I said, the tug of war, I wasn't gaining any weight. So it was really a fascinating situation how that balanced itself out. Hmm. That appointment, though, it was really, really interesting because, like I said, during that time, besides talking about the disease, we talked about other stuff for hours. Like I said, it was like an hour and a half, 2 hour appointment. And that was after I had my test. He was asking me about interests that I had, asking me about um, my job, what I did, what about Wawa management, and the story about how timely my benefits showed up just as I went into the hospital. I talked to her about how I like comics, and the Daredevil had become one of my favorites. Not that I didn't already like him before, but the whole fear mentality in my mind had come up, and Daredevil had become more of a central character that I wanted to start collecting a little bit more. She told me and showed me that she was a very avid bike rider. She liked to ride her bike. She even swung her computer face to me so I could see that her background was all about bike. It was interesting. A very, very intelligent lady, Dr. Thomas was. Very, very. I even told her about something that I was writing. I had thought about it. Now, this is the stuff you do when you literally have no energy and you're out of gas all the time, and the only thing you can do is think. Excuse me. It's almost past my bedtime, just letting you know. But I told her about something that had happened when I was talking to my cousins in regards to Daredevil, in fact, and how it had sparked something in my mind and had generated an idea. Now, what it was is my younger cousins, Shy and Tiffany, were talking to me, and we're talking about the Marvel comics and the different movies. And they're like, "Oh, is Superman a part of the Marvel universe?" But no, he's not. But it's like the Spider Man, Captain America, and I was telling them how I like that Daredevil movie that nobody else seemed to like. And I told them, it's like, during the Daredevil movie, Spider Man could have just walked right across the street and it would have been just fine because they're all in the same universe. And in fact, they're even in the same city. And when I had that conversation with my cousins, a light bulb came on. And I'm telling Dr. Thomas all of this. And I thought to myself at that moment, like, hey, what if, with all this time that I have here, I generate my own sort of comic heroes? But based on that idea, what idea? The idea of one hero existing in a universe, and in the process, they bump into another character who becomes a hero later. Whoa, what a concept. And I would just roll over heroes. So, for example, I have a hero. That hero does his thing. But in the process, that hero runs into some normal person. And in the middle of that normal person, then interacts with the hero. Once the hero's done with what the hero was going to do, that normal person throughout the story shows little glimpses of things. Essentially, the backstory for them shows up. And at the end of the original hero's show, movie, story that I was writing, that other person then moves on. Now, the next thing I would create would be that other person going back to what was their normal situation, and the event comes up, and they then become a hero. And this cycle moves on. Now, creating another hero. And of course, I wanted to make sure that these heroes would then have another hero that they would interact with in their story, but they're not a hero yet. And then they eventually become a hero. I thought it was a genius of an idea. And she's like, oh, that's pretty cool. Hope you pull that off. Now, a slight sidebar. That whole time of 2003, when I was sick, I had thought about it. But one thing that I did do was I wrote down several names. And I just didn't have the physical energy or mental energy to break up my pattern that I was doing in order to add in, let me write a little bit in order to create these heroes. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sidebar because it comes interesting. And later on, throughout the year, not even 2002, just when I go to um, a different show that I'm going to record, going to come out months from now. There was a point when I ended up destroying my angle, and that was in 2005. Don't get me wrong, this is all related because after I destroyed my ankle, I sat down and I was about to go play video games, and it turned out my Xbox died the day after my surgery. So I go up to go play, and nothing. So what was I going to do to occupy my time after having ankle surgery, which is going to require me to do nothing for a month. I took that time to actually handwrite over a 2 week period of time one of those superheroes. I called him Fear. To this day, Fear is in a book that I've got written from top to bottom over 2 weeks of me sitting there nonstop writing day and night from the time I got up in the morning until the time I went to bed at night. I took a break for lunch, a break for dinner, and a break for breakfast. And occasionally I would take maybe another hour or two off each day. But I would do nothing but write, although for 2 weeks until I completed Fear. Now, on that same note, I'm going a little further than I needed to, but I will say that I also created the second hero who interacted with Fear, and I made his backstory start to come into play in Fear, and then at the end, this guy went back home and he became a hero that I call Chaos. And I wrote that story over the next 2 weeks while I was sitting in my cast. And of course, he interacted with another hero that I called the Jade Dragon. Her story never got completed, nor did her interaction with a hero that I call the Bangle, who she interacted with. I created my universe, but I never A finished really proofing and getting it all together. B never put it out there. And the worst part about it is C, over time, for some reason, I don't understand how I did it. I kept these books together, the two that were complete, Fear and Chaos. And somehow, some way, I kind of have an idea what happened to it. Chaos went missing, and I never found it. Whole book that I had written, lost. Or so somebody would think. Turns out that I have a really weird problem when it comes to my creative nature. What happens to me is I end up writing something. If it's not complete, I can't forget it. And in order for it to be complete, I, I have to have it typed out and printed so I can see it. If it's not typed out, if it's not printed, it's not complete. And if it's not complete, it's in my head. So at any given time, if I had a pen in my hand, I could write word for word the entire book over again. And I wrote this thing 20 years ago, and it's still in my head. And I can write it down word for word right now. But that's neither here nor there. Back to the original story. I just felt that I needed to get that out. Especially since when I was talking to Dr. Thomas, I was talking to her about that whole universe. And she was like, sounds pretty cool. Maybe it's something that you probably should try. And like I said, I did 2 years afterwards. And I actually put her in my story because I didn't know how Fear was going to get his powers, but I knew what I wanted him to be. And it turns out that the perfect way to create a hero, there's so many, but the one that I chose for fear happens to have been sickness. Happened to have been sarcoidosis, but I didn't put it in there as that. But that's what it was. And it happened that the brilliant young female doctor that my main character had came up with an experimental cure, which had some side effects. And those side effects were the enhancement of anything that the individual had as a strength, but it also enhanced what an individual had as weaknesses. So, of course, my hero had a light sensitivity. So, of course, this cure gave him not blindness, but an intense light sensitivity to the point where it became his weakness. But of course, he also had a fearlessness about it. And the cure made my hero completely without fear to the point of it being almost a problem. My hero would jump across the building even though he knew he couldn't make it. Because he wasn't afraid of falling. He just would do it. I have to get over there. I'm just going to do it. Whether I make it or not, I'm going to do it. And she thought that was rather interesting. But of course, I didn't tell her that I was going to put her in it. And I didn't know I was going to put her in it until 2 years later. But like I said, she was an amazing, amazing, amazing doctor who talked me to a point where, as fearless as I had become about the disease itself and how I was going to be able to fight through it, she enhanced that. Her level of confidence and competence made me feel very comfortable with every word that came out of her mouth. It was literally like it was written between the book of John. It was literally written between the book of Luke and John. Everything that she said. Not to be blasphemous, but she was very much on point and correct with everything that she did, with everything that she said. And the fact that she kept me on the steroid, and in August, she actually did a very interesting thing. And I think that it was probably the best thing that she could have done because my doctor had to be on a steady dose at a certain level. And what she did was come up with a very unique strategy. And that strategy was to increase my dose a little bit, just a little bit. But there was a reason. She wanted to hit it hard, hit that sarcoidosis hard. And then after hitting it really hard, I was going to maintain some more blood work. And the strategy became that after a month of beating it down, I would then see her again in September. And if all things were looking in the right direction in September, my dosage would be cut in half. And then, if everything worked well throughout September, my dosage would again be cut in half in October and in November. Now, it turned out that I ended up, without going too far in the story, there was a point where I was still taking a little bit of that steroid all the way through till can't remember. It was. I don't think I was off that steroid until 2004, late 2004. We're talking like October, November 2004. It was a long time because I was still on it then. In order to make sure that I was heading in the right direction, I still maintained the steroid for almost a year, but it was at a very low dosage, and my numbers from the blood work looked better and better over time until eventually it got stopped. But none of that would have been the case had I not listened to the instructions of Dr. Thomas and executed her plan to the T. She pretty much told me, "Hey, it's gonna get a little heavier dosage, but if you start having more reactions to it, let her know, and they would adjust it." But I didn't have any problems with it because one of the main things was again the possibility of bone weakness and heartburn, massive heartburn. So I told you in a previous episode where I had to take Oscal, oyster calcium, and Pepsid every day in order to combat the steroid. And she maintained that, yeah, you should keep doing that. As long as you're on this stuff, you need to keep taking the Pepsid and the Oscal in order to make sure that the bones stay strong and that you don't get a major effect from the heartburn from the steroid. On top of that, I also had to make sure I maintained my multivitamin because I was going to need every bit of the vitamins in order to fight this. And so I did. Hmm. And ultimately, I made it back home in August and I had a very good run of it. I can certainly say that there was a very intense moment when it seemed like she was looking at things and she was writing her notes where I was like, oh my goodness, she is about to tell me that I am going to be stuck with this thing forever. And the craziest part about that was when I was thinking that, because she was getting so deep into her notes, she was writing, writing, writing. Then she looked up and she literally told me the opposite. She said, fortunately, you have a very mild case, and I expect that it's going to burn itself out. However, even if it does, you never know because of the nature of this thing if it could come back. We just don't know. And that made me very relieved because it's like, okay, we're working towards a point where we think it's going to go away. That was a positive. And I definitely, definitely glad that I had Dr. Thomas as my doctor. She, like I said, she was good. She was great. She made sure that I understood everything that was going to happen in the process that she was trying to get done. And you can't ask for better than that. I mean, it's almost like as a shop manager when I was doing that thing, I felt that it would be a good idea for every customer to understand. Like, I wasn't going to tell you that, well, what they're going to do is they're going to heat up the bolt on your tie rod end so they can crack it loose so that they can so they could get it loose, so they can we call unbolt it, pop it out. From the bottom, they're going to need a hammer after they get the castle nut off, so they can pop the tie rod out, spin it off. No, 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 not like that. Not step-by-step instructions as far as how to do what you can do. She made sure that I understood what the goal. It would be like me telling you, well, once we get the tie rod back on, we're going to have to do an alignment in order to make sure you don't ruin your tires. It's like, after we give you this medication, we're going to make sure to do blood work so that we know where we're at. Keeping me informed so I understood the process. And that, you can't ask for better when a doctor is telling you what the process is going to be. It's not like they're going to say, well, we're going to have to cut you open here and we're going to put 14 stitches there and we're going to put a bolt here. No, they give you the general knowledge of what's going to happen. They don't necessarily tell you or show you how the sausage was made, but they make sure to let you know that it's going to be made out of all beef. I'm really pleased that essentially that I'm glad that I didn't have to wait until September because I believe I mentioned that had I gone in September to the doctor that I would have had a different doctor than Dr. Thomas. It would have been somebody else because I was scheduled to see a different doctor and her schedule opened up so I could get to see her and it worked out for the best. It really did. It really, really did. My goodness. Looking at the time here and the material that I have left to work on. Hmm, what do I got going on? Well, I'm going to say that I might have maybe one more, two more episodes. If I play my cards right, I might be able to put all this together and put a bow on it next week because at the end of the day, like I said before, I'm telling you I'm telling you a lot of the important stuff that happened, and there was a few little stories between that I sort of I'm gonna wait for another format, which I'm working on to disclose every well everything that I'm willing to tell. There are some parts that will go to my grave, but then there's some stuff that I need to make sure that I let out. And for the most part, I think I'm doing a fairly good job at getting what I want out. So I'm hmm, thinking there's a pretty good chance that I might be able to finish this up by mm, the end of mm, the end of June. But as I'm looking now, I don't know. I have to consider all things. I may interrupt the story or I may not. I don't know. I just looked at some of the things that are going on and I don't know if I'm going to interrupt it. I'd like to just press all the way through. Best case scenario, I might interrupt next week's episode, but I won't know until next week for sure. But on that note, I'm going to ring the bell and end the main event. Going to be done because this is my trip to the University of Penn. The first one, the inaugural one, the one that generated the beginning of recovery. But now it's time for the spear of the week. If I had to pick a spear of the week this week, it would have to be, hmm, which one? Which one? Well, I think I know which one. It would be the recycling guys. Because I didn't tell you when I'm recording this episode, but I think I'm going to. This episode isn't going to come out until June 14th. And as we sit here, I'm recording this episode not June. Uh, this is May 27th, 2025. June 14th, 2025 is when this is going to be released. And I'm going to tell you that when I was getting ready to pick my mother up from dialysis, turns out that this is the the Tuesday after the Memorial Day holiday. Now, my normal trash pickup is Monday, so my trash was picked up now on Tuesday as a result of the holiday. Turns out that the garbage men usually aren't the most efficient, and a lot of times they don't pick up my trash until the late afternoon. We're talking sometimes they'll be there around 3 o'clock after I pick the kids up from school. Now, today, as I record, May 27th, the garbage men surprised me and they showed up extremely early. They got there around, I guess it must have been 9:30 because when I went to go pick my mother up from dialysis, I usually leave around 9:45ish. Garbage was already taken. However, the recyclables in the blue can were still there. Now, typically, a lot of times, the recyclables are usually the one that takes the longest, and a lot of times there have been the weeks where the recyclables stay past Monday and they get picked up on Tuesday because the guys aren't picking them up. Now, why is this a problem? Well, simple. Because the Wawa that's not too far away from my house is the staging area for what is absolutely like 5 or 6 sanitation trucks. 2 of them specifically recyclables, and the other 2, and the other like 3 or 4 are garbage, just straight up garbage, trash. And a lot of times, one of the or 2 of the workers actually park by my house. And it's incredible to me to think that my block doesn't get the trash picked up so late when these guys are literally right there. And then the recyclables don't get picked up. Now, I kind of understand if you're going out and using that area by my house as a staging area. And the people in my block don't get their trash or recyclables picked up early. But to me, that seems weird because you're already here. Why don't you just go grab it? But a lot of times they don't. And what they'll do is sometimes they'll get it on the way towards the end of their shift and they'll pick it up when they're dropping off their guys who have their cars around the house. They'll pick up that stuff and then they'll go. Other times they lollygag so much that they just sort of pick up their stuff the next day. That's the recyclable guys. Garbage men, they always pick up the trash. It's just sometimes later than you'd expect. But the garbage men, they they get the recyclable men. Like I said, they'll come and pick up that stuff the next day sometimes, and it bugs me. So who's the spirit of the week? The recyclable men. Why? Today I sat and watched recyclable men a street away from my house. They had already picked up the stuff along the road on the other side of my street, but every single house, my house and beyond, the recyclable cans were full. Now, granted, it's one thing to say that the people should have a break, which they're allowed to have a break, right? But when it's like your second or third break and you're right there, you can't just roll up that way and just take the stuff on my side. You just can't do that. And I see you right there, just relaxing. And there's like three garbage trucks there, and one that I know is recyclables. How do I know that? Because I watched the guy dump the recyclables in the truck and then proceeded to take that break. Why? So, why? Recyclable guys, you're the spirit of the week. Now, it's time for one of those questions. Let's see what we have here. It's killing me. I don't know where my markers are. It's kind of a problem for me because I like to have my markers, my Sharpies, everywhere I go. I have to look for them. Put it on my list of things to do for tomorrow, perhaps. Hmm. Here's one. It's just something that gets me. Question is, what grooming habit is essential to your daily life? Now, essential to my daily life. Something that I just can't not do. Have to do it. If I don't, I have a serious issue and an awful problem. I can't process it if I don't do this. And it's real simple for me. There is literally only one thing that I have as a both pet peeve personally, and I'll admit it kind of bugs me on other people too. If I had kryptonite, it would be this one personal grooming thing that makes me skeeves me out completely, and that is long nails on guys. That just skeeves me out. It just does, like to the point where I have to cut my nails at least. I can't even say every 2 weeks. It's probably more like every 10 days or less, depending on how I feel my nails are getting. Like, I will not be Wolverine or Freddy Krueger. That's just not happening. I gotta make sure these bad boys are clipped. And sometimes I'll go too far, fingernails or toenails. Now, for a person who, I know you're not gonna like to hear this, but it was horrible. In my senior year, I had an issue where my feet grew from size 12 to size 14 shoes, and I had ingrown toenails. The combination of my toenails being ingrown and my feet getting bigger made my feet hurt unbearably bad to the point where in school people looked at me crazy because I was throwing shot put and discus in high school a lot, and those shoes that I had when I was throwing shot put and discus, wrestling shoes, real tight on your feet, and it just I couldn't deal with it to the point where I had to take my shoes off in class a lot. Like people looked at me like I was crazy taking my boots off. What's wrong? My feet were growing and my toenails were ingrown. It was a miserable period of time. So I have to keep my toenails and my feet and my fingernails cut because, like I said, the idea of just having those awful long nails on dudes, I've shaken people's hands and it just, ugh. All I can think of sometimes is heroin addicts um, shooting up underneath their nails. They make sure they're nice and long so you don't see all the holes. It's, oh, mm, just talking about it makes me sick. I can't. I just can't. I have to make sure my nails, like right now, the way my fingernails look, to the average person, they would be fine. But to me, I'm gonna probably cut them tomorrow because they're just a little too long for me, and I can't. I just can't. So, without a doubt, the grooming issue that I absolutely have to do is it's got to be my fingernails and toenails. Got to keep them cut. Just got to. Got. And on that note, we're about to wrap up the show. So I'm going to show you what you're looking at. The background art, of course, another one of my one of ones. Made it this year. Last couple of them I made have been peace sign oriented. I need these things to sell, but I need to sell them at a certain place at a certain time. Hopefully they'll go. Hopefully they will. Crossing fingers. This one I call Peaceful Hearts. You can only see one. Well, it's not like I'm going to be destroying anything. You see, there's another couple of hearts with peace signs in them. That's kind of the idea. Hearts with peaceful signs. Peaceful hearts. A heart full of peace is a good thing. I can't imagine why it wouldn't be, right? So that's the background. You can always check me out on Instagram at Philip Henderson 5102. The Facebook group, join us. Join us. There's always room for one more. Speaking of one more, I'm excited for one more episode of both Houston's Hustle Hobbies. Just I love that stuff. I mean, there's just so many things that he comes up with that you wouldn't even think of. It's crazy. It's great. I need to have him back on the show sooner rather than later to talk about some of that stuff. I also want to say that there's also room for one more episode of Inside the Homes. You can't get enough of that either. I mean, I love that stuff. I do. I really do. I can't wait for the next one after every time I've listened to one. That's just the way I've always been. It's like I'm just waiting for the next one, constantly waiting for the next one. Greg and Jessica, you guys do a great job. I'm just waiting for the next one. And I hope that everybody else out there who listens to this is also waiting for the next Inside the Homes as well. Um, Words of wisdom. Till I get finished with this whole thing, I'm going to go with them again. Everyone has a story. Tell it. You never know who needs to hear it. And on that note, got to let you all know that, well, I'm Phil, and you've just listened to The Lip.